I'm very, very honored to be here and have an opportunity, especially for a chance to talk about AI with those of you who work in the public sector. I'm also excited to share the stage with my good friend, Dr. Jonathan Frankle, who's the chief AI scientist at Databricks. In the tech industry, Jonathan is renowned for co-founding Mosaic ML, which was acquired for $1.3 billion, and for co-authoring the lottery ticket hypothesis, which is one of the most influential papers in modern deep learning. His work has fundamentally shaped how the industry deploys and commercializes AI. But we met in grad school, so I know you as someone who has always been just as focused on how AI serves the people. That's something this audience cares deeply about, and it's also where Jonathan has spent meaningful time contributing. Jonathan has implemented AI principles with the OECD. He has also worked at the Georgetown Law Center on privacy and technology, teaching computer science classes to lawyers, and also co-authoring a landmark paper on police surveillance. On a more personal note, I served the city of San Jose as chief data officer in the midst of the George Floyd protests. Jonathan was one of my advisors and helped us think about how to use citizen data and how to adopt some of those technologies. And some of the impact of his advice and our work was making sure that people got access to safety net services during COVID-19. So this conversation isn't just about what AI can do, it's about what it should do and who it should work for. Our session is called AI for the People, and I can't think of a better person to have this conversation with. Jonathan, I want to start with you. You've operated in both cutting-edge AI labs as well as policy environments. What inspired you to bridge the two worlds?
I don't think you can do one without doing the other, quite frankly. What are you building and who are you building it for and why are you building it if you don't understand the audience, the people who are going to use it, the consequences of using it? What are you even building for? It's another form of asking, what does your customer want? Your customer happens to be society, in addition to just the people who are buying it from you. And vice versa, you can't really advise policymakers unless you understand the technology deeply. And I spend a lot of time, honestly, in informal ways these days, just trying to provide input on how the technology works, what it does and doesn't do, where the fault lines are, where there are opportunities for regulation. I don't think you can really do that effectively unless you're in the weeds of the technology and building every day.
You were the inaugural staff technologist at the Georgetown Law Center for Privacy and Technology. Hopefully I'm getting the name right.
Yeah,
and
no,
they didn't change the acronym.
Oh, no.
That's a really unique role. Like, I'd love to get your perspective on what did you learn being embedded with lawyers and policymakers? How is that different from your time as a PhD student at MIT?
I think it was a great opportunity to just learn how someone who isn't technical and has to deal with the consequences of technical systems thinks about the problems. Lawyers don't think about it in terms of, how is the system designed, where are the modules, which components do you focus on, how is the industry structured? They focus on outcomes. They focus on how it affects people, why it matters, what it does, what values are at play, things that aren't measurable. And I mean, that was just an incredible experience. Honestly, it served me really well from a business perspective because, your customers don't care about what the modules are and how the technology is built. They care about what it does, how it works, who it's useful to, what the side effects are, what you can actually do with the technology. And honestly, it's a pretty similar perspective, just different goals. But they care about the values. They care about the intangible aspects of the technology. And it's something that just, isn't part of a technical education in a traditional PhD or undergrad degree in computer science.
Yeah. I mean, because we've known each other for a while, I actually know the full timeline and sequence of when you were doing all of this. I think what really sets Jonathan apart was he was actually he was teaching computer science to lawyers, contributing to policy while he was also finishing his PhD at MIT, but before, or maybe concurrently, Mosaic ML. Yeah.
Yeah, it all kind of got jumbled in there. I think I was done teaching lawyers about a year before we founded Mosaic. So I don't think I ended up having everything overlap at once, but it was there was a lot of stuff going on. That was a busy time.
Yeah, it was COVID too. Jonathan, you've spent a lot of time thinking about not only what AI can do, but what it should do. So how do you personally think about that responsibility?
I think it puts a lot of onus on us to measure. We talk a lot about building agents and using AI to automate things. We talk very little about measuring whether AI is doing what we want it to do. And I mean that in a really nuanced way. If I told you I had a human and the human was going to do a job, pick your favorite job, how would you measure how they're doing? You'd do a performance review every 6 months. You'd look at their work occasionally and spot check it. You'd give them feedback over time. Maybe you'd put them on a performance improvement plan or promote them. Now, if I told you had 100,000 humans, what would you do? How would you know who's doing a good job and who's not? Or if I told you I had 100,000 copies of the same human, I think my favorite example here is driving. Look at Waymo. You mess up one Waymo car. You don't mess up one, you mess up every Waymo car. There was the famous example in San Francisco recently where there was a power outage. All the traffic lights turned off. One 16-year-old who doesn't know what to do there can block an intersection. Waymo cars can block the entire city. Same thing, just copied and pasted thousands of times. And it puts a lot more pressure on rigorously measuring how AI works. And in the same way that a 16-year-old gets a license for driving around a parking lot without crashing, and Waymo has spent $20 billion measuring driving to a degree that was just unimaginable decades ago, even a decade ago or 5 years ago for that matter, that's how we're going to have to measure AI. Digital systems can be scaled arbitrarily and can cause arbitrary damage at scale. And if we're going to deploy AI in lieu of humans without the human judgment that we assume and without the guardrails we've naturally built into our world around humans being the main operators, we're going to have to measure really rigorously. And in the same way Waymo had to take measure driving and turn that into something that was a set of numbers that they could actually work off of, every meaningful application of AI is going to have to be measured to that same extent. And I don't think we know the first thing about how to do that right now.
But perhaps that is the role of government, right? In lieu of developing the actual technologies, I think government has a role in perhaps not so much measuring, but at least building accountability and mechanisms and guardrails around measurement and quality. This is a good segue into kind of the next section, which is talking about the use of AI in government. We have a lot of public sector leaders here who are thinking about how AI is transforming their divisions and the way they deliver services to their citizens. Where do you think is the biggest opportunity for AI in actually improving how government serves people?
So there are a lot, and I think everybody's really excited about AI. Honestly, I want to start with the risks. The way that I look at a lot of what AI is getting, at least when I talk to my customers, is AI gives people a reason to actually get their data organized, even if the AI itself is not actually a worthwhile outcome for a particular application. Just getting the data organized, digitized, in a form where you can operate on it really easily can be game-changing for a lot of very basic services that government provides. The second way I look at it is that a lot of people want to just put agents everywhere and use an agent to run every process and just let AI do things. I actually make a distinction of AI in the control plane versus AI in the data plane, or kind of using AI to build the application versus actually having AI power the application. I think a lot of the best applications of AI right now are actually just using AI to build something that would have been very expensive, very complicated, or take a long time to build historically, but is still a piece of software. And you're just deploying a piece of software. The software is not making decisions itself. It's not doing arbitrary things, sending people arbitrary messages. Just have it write code. You can build extraordinarily complex applications that no human could have built, or you can build applications quickly that no human could have built in that amount of time or with resources that would have been unthinkable before. But it's still a digital application that runs on code that you can inspect, that has deterministic behavior that you can test and operate. And to me, that seems like a nice, safe middle ground before you just say, let's throw agents at every problem. Let's do agents for customer service. Let's do agents for, helping you solve problems. Let's have an agent do your taxes. Let's have an agent. To me, that requires a degree of measurement that we need to learn how to perform, or low-risk applications that genuinely aren't going to be that impactful because they're incredibly low risk. If they were impactful, they'd probably be higher risk and they'd matter for people's lives. But the ability to build software very quickly for things that you didn't have software for before, or to organize data at scale as a one-time operation or a repeated ongoing operation, but not actually have it in the decision-making process, is still really, really powerful, and I don't see a lot of folks doing that. When I look around my team and what my customers are doing, merely the ability to build software faster and more efficiently is honestly the most valuable part of AI right now.
And one of the things that we were chatting about earlier is also the importance of productivity and completeness from a public sector perspective. I think one of the things I learned when I was working for the city of San Jose was, like my view on government really changed because I felt like City Hall in a lot of ways, like we are overseeing a lot of departments focused on customer service. Like in a lot of ways, your City Hall, your local government is a platform for service delivery. But unlike private sector companies, you can't really pick your customer, like you're not really supposed to pick your optimal customers, right? Like governments spend a lot of time thinking about last mile service delivery, thinking about edge cases, thinking about the communities that is hardest to serve. And I think that is also one of the opportunities with building software faster, getting more complete data, and just being more productive, is you can be more complete in your ability to deliver services, and you can also create more accountability.
Yeah, when I look at the completeness question, I don't know, I think it actually intersects pretty closely with the question of whether AI is going to replace people's jobs. Like when I think about my customers who are in the insurance industry, they would love for AI to do more underwriting work. And I don't see that as something that replaces people who are doing underwriting. It allows underwriters to focus on the edge case policies that AI is not going to be able to handle right now. That means insurance companies can get back into Florida and California as markets because you can have your skilled underwriters focus on spending a lot more time on the policies that would be very difficult to write and not as much time on the policies that are cookie cutter because AI can generally handle a lot of that stuff pretty easily. So by reducing the cost of doing any particular amount of work, I don't think we're really getting rid of work, but it allows us to be more complete. Another example I see a lot is like, is AI going to replace lawyers? And my answer is probably not. I really wished you could get an estate plan without having to spend hours and thousands of dollars to get a really, really good estate plan. If AI makes that easier, cool. We're going to have lawyers that write a lot more estate plans than they could before, and they're going to focus on the complex ones, and people are going to have estate plans. I think the same is true for just about anybody who's doing some kind of customer service function or doing something that has a repetitive nature to it, but where there are always these complex boundary cases that are going to be beyond the power of AI to address right now. And getting the humans focused on those where we just wouldn't put humans on that either because we have too much work to do in kind of the cookie cutter common case, or because right now it's not worth the cost to bother trying to write a policy for one individual with one house in California in a potentially wildfire prone area. Now the underwriter may actually have the capacity to do that and do that efficiently enough that it makes sense. I think one example I heard recently, I was chatting with someone who did merger transactions in the 80s. And what he told me was that back then a merger was a stack of punch cards, and you did 3 mergers a year, and you couldn't handle particularly complex transactions because we just didn't have the technology to do that. Now, firms do far more than 3 mergers a year. The complexity of transactions we can handle is orders of magnitude more than what we could at the beginning, not just the number, but the complexity. Bankers focus on that because it's more interesting and it's where their brain is needed. But we didn't stop doing mergers or fire all the bankers. In fact, we do a lot more mergers, and the work is a lot more interesting than it used to be.
I mean, that really resonates also just with my time serving in pandemic government. When I was at the Small Business Administration in March of 2020, we launched the Paycheck Protection Program. It was one of the first programs that came out of the first Trump administration. The SBA gave out more loans in the first 30 days of the pandemic than the last 30 years. My parents ran a restaurant for 10 years in LA and never got an SBA loan. And so one of the big things that we did, right, to your point, Jonathan, is we actually gave government contracts to all of the fintechs because banks were completely backlogged. Like they did not know how to process Paycheck Protection Program loans at that scale. And so the fintechs ended up helping us administer, I think, over $800 billion into the economy. Ended up becoming quantitative easing, but that was unintentional. But what I also appreciated was we never got any pushback from the banks or anybody within governments. Like we really saw fintechs as partners to help us reach communities that were historically unbanked, and most importantly, get money out as fast as possible and keep people employed. I want to go back to your earlier point about the risk. So I think at this point, we're preaching to the choir around the potential of AI in terms of increasing access to services, but it also has the potential to reinforce bias. How do you think about how we should navigate that tension?
Yeah, I think the 2 biggest kinds of risks from AI are honestly a lack of measurement or a lack of knowledge about what it does, and the fact that you can scale it arbitrarily immediately. If you hired one biased employee or one employee who was not performing well, yeah, they can't do that much damage. They can do damage in a localized setting. If you develop an AI system that has a bad behavior, you have instantly scaled that to potentially millions of people right off the bat. And so I'm going to sound like a broken record. It's about measurement. You have a large language model can do anything and produce any kind of output that you want. That means you have to be able to measure anything it can do. You have to be able to measure when it goes off the rails and goes off topic and doesn't even address the problem. You have to measure things you couldn't imagine. And so it puts a lot of pressure on doing very gradual rollouts, on inspecting very carefully. There are automated ways to look at its interactions with people, but it also puts a lot of pressure on us to try to figure out what the blind spots are going to be in advance. Bias being, at this point, an obvious one now that we have a decade of AI experience under our belts, and we've seen a lot of things go terribly wrong. There are new failure modes of AI that we're discovering all the time. Everything from things that are as mundane as doom loops, where the AI will just keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again. There was the incident where I think it was Air Canada's AI system promised, free flights to people, or promised refund policies that didn't exist. There's now, AI risk in just AI installing a Python package on your computer that might be compromised and compromising the entire server. These are things that I certainly wasn't thinking about a few years ago. Thinking about bias in AI was more novel in 2015. I hope we've now trained a generation of computer scientists who think about bias as kind of a first principles thing you need to monitor, like security, or like privacy. We now think about bias in the same way. Figuring out how to measure that is still really hard, and I won't remotely claim that there's a scientific answer to that question right now, or that we have good systems for doing this. At Databricks, we're trying really hard to build products that help with this. It's still difficult, and I won't claim that anyone has a solution to how you measure whether an AI system is doing what you want, let alone in complex areas like, did it drive well? But even in simple things like, was it biased in the way that it responded to one population versus another population? That is at least more measurable, or at least we have a better way to measure it. But what does it mean to be biased in the context where it can say anything? At least when I worked on facial recognition, you could look at differential accuracy. In text-based conversations, what do you even begin to measure?
I think your emphasis on measurement ties to the fact that you care about quality. You care about the effects of these models when they're deployed in the real world. And I think for all the public servants in the room and at this conference, you know that when you're doing things in a public sector context, when you're delivering services, especially to people who might not have that same level of technological, digital, right, or even language literacy, the stakes are so much higher. Jonathan, maybe the last question I have on this topic is just, what are some of the biggest gaps between building any type of model or any system, right, in a test environment versus deploying it in a real world? How should we think about acceptability and quality?
It's honestly kind of terrifying. I mean, if you are deploying AI at scale, you should be really nervous. That's not to say you shouldn't do it. The fact that you're nervous means you'll hopefully do a good job. But you should be nervous right now because, quite frankly, we don't know how to measure whether it's doing a good job in the real world, and people's behaviors change as soon as you present an AI system. You can do your best to measure a system in a test environment where you construct some specific examples, there are specific outputs you look for, you measure the difference between what the AI system produced and what your target output was in various ways. There are processes for this, even if I still think the technology is pretty nascent and we don't really know what we're doing as a research community right now. We've got at least some basic procedures that you can follow and hope you're going to get a good result. As soon as you put it in the real world, first of all, the things that people are going to try to do with your system will be different than what you predicted. And tracking that is really hard. But then as soon as you give someone an AI system, their behavior will change and they'll do different things naturally. And I can give you some examples of that. But then as soon as you update your system or your evaluation to address that, they'll change their behavior again. And you're chasing a moving target for a long time because you've literally changed the product and people are learning how to use it for the first time. One great example of this, Google now gives you those AI summaries. How many people have started asking Google actual questions? Whereas we were all trained to not ask Google questions, to give keywords, and that Google is not a conversation. You just put in some keywords and we use quotes here, and we were all trained a certain way to use Google. As soon as they brought out those AI summaries, everybody's behavior changed for how they were using Google, and they treated it more like a chatbot. Just a chatbot where you don't get to respond again. You get one question. And that completely breaks the behavior of the AI summaries. And you have to start over and build it again around this new set of behaviors. As soon as you address that, the AI summaries probably get better, and then you have to change how you're measuring again. People's quality expectations change over time, and even if you don't change anything and the underlying model changes, even if the underlying model doesn't officially change, it may change day to day in ways you don't understand, your system's behavior may change. The last thing I always like to flag here is that there's a difference between quality and business metrics, or quality and kind of user acceptance metrics. If someone's asking AI a question, it's often because they don't know the answer and they don't know what a good answer looks like, and they won't know if you gave them a factually correct answer. This comes up a lot in health-related applications where you have a health-related chatbot where you can ask questions about your personal data. How are you going to know if you got a good medical diagnosis or a good suggestion for an approach to take? The chatbot says, this sounds like you might have this condition, or why don't you take a look at this article, even things that aren't literally health advice. If you ask a user, thumbs up, thumbs down, was this good? How the hell am I supposed to know? I'm asking you. I don't know whether this is factual. If anybody's used deep research, how do you know if deep research gave you a good answer? The whole point of asking deep research is that you don't know. And so the kind of business metric of engagement, or whether a user thumbs up or thumbs down or selected this output versus that output, is not always an indicator that you actually did a good job. And a great way to get good engagement on a healthcare chatbot is to tell everybody they've got a severe disease. Engagement and quality are not aligned with each other, and just seeing that users have highly adopted an AI application does not mean you actually did a good job. And coding is in some sense the one exception where you have millions upon millions of expert users who can actually check the behavior of the system to see if it produced good code. That's pretty rare among consumers of AI systems. And I don't think we should take the success of AI in coding as an indicator that we can just deploy AI arbitrarily, and if we see high uptake, that means it's actually doing a good job.
And to take this even further, I mean, Jonathan, the examples that you gave kind of shows us how AI has already shaped digital norms, right? But for a lot of the public servants in the rooms, when we're thinking about citizen adoption of AI, right? Or even just automated things like automated license plate readers or facial recognition software, we're sensitive to the fact that that type of technological adoption will change the norms of built spaces, of physical spaces. I think this is actually a great segue to your work on police surveillance. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of the Perpetual Lineup, which is the landmark report on police surveillance, and your team is now revisiting the impact. Looking back over the past decade, what has meaningfully changed in the technology itself, how it's deployed, and how policymakers are thinking about it?
Yeah, so this was a report we worked on, I guess in 2015 and 2016 on police use of facial recognition, just trying to understand where it was being used, which at that time was not well known. We knew the FBI was using it. A couple of police departments had announced it, but nobody had done a comprehensive survey. We filed a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests. I spent a lot of time looking at the state of the technology in 2015 or 2016. It was actually pretty good back then for the state of the underlying AI technology. It was relatively accurate compared to what one might have expected. We looked at it as a piece of privacy research at that time. The idea of AI, even saying the word AI back then, made you sound crazy because it was machine learning. And the people who said AI were the crazy ones who thought that AI was going to take over the world and kill us all. That's changed a lot. But even back then, I didn't look at it as AI work. I thought it was privacy, security, maybe surveillance work. And at that time, I think there was just similar issues that the technology was being widely deployed and people had impressions about how good or bad it was that weren't really founded on any data. I think there was a police department at that time that had in their frequently asked questions, could this technology be biased? And the answer was, no, it's a digital algorithm. It can't see race or gender, which sounds silly. Like, we all know better now. In 2015, I could see how someone would believe that even if it was wrong. We were more naive. And I think we've all come a long way in our understanding of the risks of this technology. Now the risk is that we have a lot of people telling us that we have super intelligence and people believe it. When we have a very powerful set of technologies that are going to change the world, are already changing the world, and that doesn't mean that they're super intelligence. We can live in the in-between where we have something remarkable and something still deeply flawed and cope with that. And so in some sense, it hasn't changed that much. I think now, it's much more in the spotlight, but, with respect to facial recognition technology in particular, it's basically a solved problem in some sense. Up to the quality of the data and the quality of the inputs you have, The biggest limitation now is you put a camera in bad lighting, or you get bad footage, or you don't have a good picture of the person, or two people actually look really similar. Short of that, it's actually a pretty easy problem to solve relative to training a large language model. In 2015, it was a pretty hard technical problem that some people had made good progress on. Now it's the kind of thing that you could do in an intro AI class and build something much better than anything we had back in even 2018, 2019. So remarkable from that perspective. The risks haven't changed. And I think the last thing is that in some sense the narrative has changed. A lot of jurisdictions have banned police use of facial recognition, which is one reasonable response. It's not my preferred response personally from a policy perspective if you had access to full nuance and could put in the perfect policy, but if you gave me a choice between using it arbitrarily everywhere all the time and banning it pending specific acceptable uses, I would take the latter in the case of facial recognition, because that can deprive someone of their freedom if misused or used improperly. That doesn't mean we should ban AI or anything close to that. I think there are a lot of really valuable applications of AI that we should embrace that are lower risk than depriving someone of their freedom. But in cases where AI might lead to that, we should exercise a lot of caution and probably say no first, and then ask ourselves under what conditions we would consider it to be valuable.
I also appreciated that in the report, you guys weren't just, you weren't just researching the potential biases, you were also researching guardrails, right, and issues of potential guardrails. There's a common assumption in both the private and the public sector that adding a human in the loop is one way to guardrail these systems. And you see this actually very much in the public sector. When we were in San Jose, one of the decisions we made after the George Floyd protests is making sure that there was always a human reviewer, right, or human evaluator looking at body cam footages. But your research from over 10 years ago showed that if mistrained, right, or undertrained, even human evaluators will make mistakes half of the time.
Yeah, it turns out humans are really bad at facial recognition.
Yeah. Yes.
Like really bad, and humans think they're really good.
I blame the media.
We all think that we're really good at recognizing people's faces because we recognize our friends. Yeah. It turns out we're really bad at facial recognition, even if you have two photos in front of you. Saying these are or are not the same person is actually a very challenging task. People with training do better, but still don't do amazingly well. There are lots of surveys of, say, passport, examiners or things like that, where they still make a lot of mistakes. And the same is going to be true with any AI system we deploy at scale. Human review is not in itself the solution. Proper training for humans and measuring how the humans do and measuring how the human plus AI system does, that can be really good. But human plus AI can lead to even more mistakes than either one individually. Sometimes people will just see that an AI said something and kind of go with it. It's not obvious that you can just combine these two things and naturally get something that works well. So human review is great. At least humans can't make mistakes at scale in the same way. Humans are in some sense a source of friction, and humans often look for different things than AI or make different mistakes than AI does. But you don't just naturally combine them, and human review is not an antidote. Saying, oh, we're using AI, but we have a human in the loop, that's not necessarily a solution to any problem.
I think this is a good segue to talk about the future of work. I think a lot of us in the room workforce and AI's effect on the labor market has been top of mind. I've lost count of the number of days I wake up and see a headline about another layoff. I run a VC fund that's focused on dual-use technologies. I invest in technologies that can serve government and commercial markets. That means that my parents think that I'm investing in things like rockets and drones, but a third of my portfolio is actually HR software, because people forget that state and local government is the single largest employment category in America. It's responsible for over 24 million jobs. And so as a team, I sit on the boards of companies like Holly that enables competitive hiring for government, companies like FlashPass, which helps governments reduce unemployment, and companies like Arkenstone, which is helping government contractors get onboarded in a secure way. There's a lot of fear around job displacement in our industry. So from your perspective, where does AI actually replace work, and how does it augment it?
I think that AI replaces work where people don't embrace AI. In the same way that if you were in the year 2005 and didn't use a computer, there were relatively few jobs that would be compatible with lacking that skill or lacking that willingness. If you weren't using email in 2005, you would probably been left behind by how most companies operated and most jobs operated, you'd be a tough person to hire. Quite frankly, in not only knowledge work, but in many kinds of work. And I think the same is true for AI. That doesn't mean computers replaced a lot of people. Computers did replace certain job functions, but we didn't have mass unemployment, and computers were adopted gradually over the course of decades in ways that allowed people to transition. And I think AI is going to look similar in that respect. But if you don't embrace it in whatever your job is and adapt, you're going to be left behind. And I don't think that's a scary, controversial statement. It's not going to mean mass layoffs, mass displacement all at once. Some new model will come out and everybody's jobs are gone. But it does mean that if you ignore it in the same way some people completely ignored computers, your organization, your job will be obsolete, because it turns out that a computer is really good at adding numbers. And a computer is really good at managing large amounts of data. And a computer is really good now at doing OCR, and data entry is less of an exciting job to have. And I think the same is going to be true for AI. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but it is happening. I tell all my software engineers, you're not going to be replaced, but you need to use these tools, and if you ignore them, you will be replaced, or at least you'll be obsolete. And I think this is true across jobs. My usual nudge to people is, even if you're not using AI in the data plane, like you're actually deploying AI in your product, in your service, in whatever system you're doing day to day, you should at least be using AI yourself to do your work and to build the systems that you're deploying or improve the systems you're deploying. That seems like a no-brainer at this stage. Whether you actually deploy AI in production is very use case sensitive, very sensitive to risk and the damage that you can do if you deploy something at scale that's bad, and the extent to which you can measure if you're going to deploy something at scale in a risky application. But if you're not using AI today and you aren't trying to use AI today, you're on track to be left behind no matter what your job is. There aren't safe jobs and unsafe jobs. There are jobs where people use technology and jobs where people refuse to use technology, and the people who use technology will be better off.
I mean, I agree that these technologies aren't going away. I think a view that you and I both share is that technological adoption within government is inevitable, but needs guardrails. So as we close, what does responsible inevitability look like for AI more broadly?
I think it looks like gradual embrace in the places where you can embrace it today, keeping an eye on the places where it's going to show up in the future. And usually, I build the technology, so I focus on ways of using the technology, less so applications. But things like using AI in your day-to-day work, where it can do something faster than you or allow you to take care of something boring that you couldn't do otherwise. That is relatively low risk and should be happening today, as long as you think about privacy and security of the data you're inputting into AI, or how AI is interacting so that it can't see things it shouldn't see. Yeah, use it. Why not? Check it. Don't use it to just do your work blindly. You're the guardrail. You can evaluate the quality of the work, but it can often do things faster and better than you can. So embrace it. Use it and do more work, or do work on the things that are more interesting to you or more important. Having AI help you build applications that you can then vet and deploy. The applications don't look any different. It's just a piece of software. It's just a website. But now you don't need to contact a web design firm and pay $20,000. You can do it yourself. Just do it. Get it done. That saves you a lot of time and a lot of money, and there's no excuse. Simple web apps that interact with data or have people input information, store that information, and do something with it. Yeah, a lot of people can do that. Or if you're already doing software to some extent, you can now do it a lot faster and think more about the quality of the application and what it does and its functionality, not how you get the stupid code to work. That you can all do today. There's kind of no excuse to not do that. If you're not doing that, you're not serving your citizens, your customers as well as you could. Then there are questions of, should you put AI in production? Should you use AI for real use? Should somebody be interacting with an AI chatbot to receive a service? And the first thing you have to think about is cost. The second thing you have to think about is quality. And the third thing you have to think about is risk. These things can get really expensive if you deploy them at scale and they get popular. You can end up in a world of hurt very quickly with a very big bill if you're not careful. The second part is quality. Is it delivering a remotely good response to the point where it's useful to someone? And the third is, what is the risk? Using it to decide who you're going to put away in jail? Very different than using it to answer frequently asked questions based upon a bunch of documents that nobody's actually going to read. Answering what a process looks like. How do I get yard waste picked up? How do I schedule that? Yeah, having a chatbot where you can ask a question, get an answer, that sounds great. Why not? Relatively low risk. You can provide a citation to the source where that came from and somebody can check it themselves. And worst comes to worst, they don't call the right phone number. Not worst comes to worst, somebody is unsafe.
I mean, I just agree. I'm just smiling because we've talked about this for, at this point, over a decade. And I also just think people need to remember that you have to make trade-offs, right? There is no perfect deployment of any type of technology. But I think the thing that erodes democracy the most, it erodes faith in institutions, is when you undermeet customer expectations. And so there's something pretty powerful about, public sector leaders now actually having AI tools, technology, data that could help increase their productivity, improve the way they serve their communities. There's a lot of, we need guardrails. There's a lot of risks, but ultimately, I actually still feel very optimistic. I don't know if that's how you feel.
Oh, we should be thrilled. We have a new, computers changed the world over the course of decades.
Yeah.
The internet changed the world over the course of decades. Imagine running a city today without the internet.
Yeah.
Everything would be really slow. Everything would take forever. People would have to make phone calls. People would have to send mail. It would be a nightmare. And, maybe some folks here actually had to deal with that world or are still dealing with aspects of that world. I'm glad I never really had to live in that world. AI is going to have the same effect. It is here. It's going to be here. It's going to get better. It's going to get more ubiquitous. It's going to be incredibly useful and change the world. And why would you deny your citizens the benefits of that technology as quickly as possible within reason?
Jonathan, thank you so much for being here with us today. And to all of you in the audience, thanks for giving us your lunch break. Hope this was fun.
Thank you.